Hello everyone, my name is John, I'm the Geeky Fanboy, and welcome back to Baker Street Reviews, the series where I watch and review all kinds of different Sherlock Holmes adaptations. And this time, we're actually doing like a sequel episode to a Baker Street review I did in early 2021, when I reviewed the first episode of the Japanese HBO series Miss Sherlock. And since then, I have actually finished watching the show, and I thought I'm going to make a little follow-up video on this, telling you my thoughts on the show, so I can, give you more of a proper opinion that is not just based on the first episode. So, in case you haven't seen that video yet, there's the thingy. In case you want to go ahead and watch that one first, where I give my thoughts on and my reaction on the first episode of the series. So, for those who don't know, Miss Sherlock, like I said, is a Japanese HBO series. It's very much in the style of BBC Sherlock, so much so that I would argue that it is actually more based on the BBC series than the original stories. So you could say it's inspired by the stories and characters of Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, but it's based on BBC Sherlock. Like the style, the visuals, the writing and the characterization, even some of the acting is very similar to what you see in the BBC series. So it's very much set in modern day Japan. It's happening now. The main actress who plays Sherlock, you can tell from her mannerisms and also in the way her character is written, is very similar to Benedict Cumberbatch's Sherlock. And even, I would argue, some of the episodes take inspiration from the stories in the BBC series. But I'm gonna come back to that. But just so you know, as a general thing, I would, when you go into this, don't expect necessarily a take on the original stories. Maybe expect more of a take on this very popular idea of, Sherlock in the 21st century. Especially with an inspiration from the BBC show, since I would argue that the BBC Sherlock series is very much responsible for this popularizing the idea of pulling Sherlock into the 21st century. So maybe keep that in mind. I'm also going to come back to that. So we're in present-day Japan, in Tokyo. We do have the familiar setup. We have Sherlock, who is called Sherlock in the show. She is... well, first of all, as you've already guessed from the pronouns, Sherlock, is a woman in the show, as is Dr. Watson. This was the first series to cast the main characters as women, like the first big series to actually do that, which is already, I think, a huge plus point. I'm all for that. I don't mind, like, just let people play Sherlock regardless of gender. I think that works wonderfully as long as the writing is good. So Sherlock and Watson are played by women in the series. The rest of the characters are as is. Naturally, they have different names. Sherlock is still called Sherlock, but it's more treated as a nickname she has chosen for herself. Dr. Watson is Dr. Watto, which I think is kind of cute because they do kind of try to get the original names in there, even though it's Japanese, and I think that's cute. So Dr. Watto is like Dr. Watto-san, and I think that's cute. We do have a character that is inspired by Lestrade, though he has a different name. I think it's like Detective, like Inspector Raimon or something like that. I'm sorry if I get these names wrong. But yeah, we do have a Lestrade character who's like the detective inspector of, the Tokyo police. He has an assistant who is like a new character created for the show. We do have Mycroft, who has a different name, obviously, but he is the older brother of Sherlock in the series. And we also get Moriarty, who is not called Moriarty, but still has a Japanese-sounding name, which I'm not going to try to pronounce. I'm going to put it here. But I love that it still kind of sounds like Moriarty, but in Japanese, so I kind of appreciate that. So, first off, let's start talking about the characters. So, Miss Sherlock is, as I've said, she is very similar to Benedict Cumberbatch's Sherlock. So much so that even, you know, some of the mannerisms are very much similar. So like she does like the hand thing a lot, and the way her character's written, the characterization is very close to the BBC version, as well as in that, you know, some of the mannerisms Sherlock exhibits in the canon are exaggerated, like Sherlock's very much rude. She's very impolite and rude and sort of interrupts people, and she's not just socially awkward, she is really, like in the BBC series, Sherlock is kind of an arsehole in this series. And you're kind of wondering why people like her. Even Watson sort of says throughout this series, I don't like you, you're not my friend, we're just living together and I don't understand why anyone likes her. but we're going to come back to how the friendship is characterized. But yeah, Sherlock very much is the outsider in this as well. It takes maybe some getting used to, I think. The actress does a very good job, though, I think, with the way her character is written, even though it's like, you know, a sort of exaggerated version of the original character. I think the actress does a fantastic job, even though she takes some bits of it, like, you know, Benedict Cumberbatch. I think she still makes the character very much her own, and she has enough charisma to sort of carry this character, even though Sherlock is characterized as being a bit of a twat. It still works though, because, you know, the way she plays her makes her very sort of charismatic and definitely eccentric, definitely eccentric, which again makes her more interesting. And you get some neat little tidbits that are inspired by the canon. For example, Sherlock in this doesn't play the violin, she plays the cello, and the actress did actually learn how to play the cello. And it looks absolutely fantastic when you get like the few scenes where she plays the cello. I think it very much works with her character. Just visually speaking, I think she works great, because they give her very elegant, interesting looking outfits and a cool like brown trench coat, which also sends a contrast to how Baker Street looks, which is something I always point out. I want Sherlock to look clean and elegant, because, you know, he knows how to dress. He's not like, as much as I like Robert Downey Jr.'s version, he's not like that. He doesn't dress like that, you know, he knows how to dress. And the Sherlock in this series very much looks always very elegant, very neat, has some very interesting and beautiful outfits. But Baker Street looks like messy, and I love that contrast. So visually speaking, Sherlock looks fantastic, I think, and the way she plays her makes her very interesting, I think. They even, what I like, which maybe arguably this show does even a bit better than the BBC series, is showing Sherlock's vulnerable side, that this is something he, or she in this case, she tries to not show, or doesn't allow herself to show, but that there are moments, especially towards the end of the series, where things happen where she is allowed to break down, where we see her break down, where we see her have an emotional moment, and it just makes sense that that is in there. I will go more into that when I get into like the spoiler parts of the review, but I like that you do get those moments where occasionally the vulnerability sort of shines through, and I like her. Like I've definitely seen worse versions of the character. I think she's very much able to make the character her own, and if there had been a second season, I would have definitely been very interested in watching it. But with what we get in those 8 episodes, I think it works well, and I think she is a very compelling main character and interesting version of the Sherlock Holmes character. And her friendship with Watson, or Dr. Watto, is very much at the core of this, because while the two actors, and this is also why I'm going to start talking about Watson, while the two actresses maybe don't share the same charismatic chemistry as Martin Freeman and Benedict Cumberbatch did, I don't think it's bad, because the two actresses definitely do have chemistry. They definitely do, and they work very well off each other. But what the show does is that these two, in these 8 episodes, are still getting to know each other. Like, it literally starts in the first episode with them moving in. They've just met each other for the first time, they move in together, and just picks up there. So naturally they wouldn't immediately move into, oh, we're now best friends. actually throughout most of these 8 episodes, they keep telling other people we're not friends. We just live together because circumstances brought us together. We're not friends. I'm not even sure if we like each other. And I kind of like it because they do have chemistry, and you do see how their relationship develops and how they learn to sort of appreciate each other. So that towards the end of those 8 episodes, you can really understand why they have come to like each other. I would argue the writing isn't always great in like sort of the relationship chemistry department, especially for these two characters. I would have liked there to be a bit more depth and detail to it. But I appreciate that we don't immediately jump from, okay, they meet, and then we jump to they're now best friends and colleagues and just know everything about each other. I do like that we get to see like a bit of progression there, how they become best friends, and especially from like Sherlock's side, we see how she is making like a proper friend for the first time in her life, and I think that's very, very cute and interesting to see. Now, Watson is, I would argue, not you can't really compare her to like the Watson BBC series. I think she's very much different, in a good way, but also in a more negative way. In a more negative way, as in, I think she's a bit too passive. I think Watson is a bit too passive in this show. Like, she is a war medic who just returned from Syria, and which is great. But they sort of jump back from that because she's like, I want to try different work. So we see in a couple of episodes, we see her working in different fields. Which I can kind of appreciate, because it would be like, yeah, sure, if you come back home from Syria, like in the middle of a war zone, you would maybe want to not work in that field anymore, so you try something else. I can kind of appreciate that, but I'm sort of still missing, like, occasionally Watson gets those moments where she, can apply her medical skills in the field when she's out with Sherlock, looking up a corpse, or what did they die from, that sort of stuff. But she wasn't really allowed to be like practical in that way, like where she was really allowed to like apply her knowledge. I was sort of missing that. She is very much more of like the sidekick, the companion character, who's there to like ask questions, bounce off ideas off with Sherlock, to sort of be the one who's like, huh, how did you know that? Or wow, you're weird. She's not a punching bag, though. She's not like a punching bag for like jokes or anything, which is what I like. She's not an idiot. She's not a fool. She is a bit naive, I would argue. And like I said, a bit too passive. But she's never the butt of the joke, which is what I massively appreciate when it comes to characterizing Dr. Watson in an adaptation. And I do like how the actress plays Watson. There's sort of this shy introvertedness about her character, but that she's still level-headed enough, direct enough to call Sherlock out on bullshit when she's being weird or when she's being impolite and rude. That she's not afraid to say, no, we're not at that stage, we're not friends yet. We're living together and I kind of help you out, but we're not friends yet, and what you're doing is not good. I kind of appreciate that what they're doing there. And like I said, the core of their friendship develops as the series goes on, over the stretch of those 8 episodes, and very much becomes more important as the story goes on, and becomes very much the focus of like the final couple of episodes, where you can really see how Dr. Watson has developed and how her relationship to Sherlock has developed. Now, what I do appreciate, which is something I've talked about before in regards to the BBC series, that I would have absolutely loved it if in the BBC series, because the start of the show with, like the BBC show with Watson, having flashbacks of war, and he goes to therapy, and you're thinking, oh cool, are they going with Watson has PTSD? Not really. Like, they sort of brush it aside after the first episode. It's never addressed again, and it's really just like, okay, Watson has a psychosomatic limp, and then he overcomes it like that. And in Miss Sherlock, they do actually take the time to explore that a bit. They don't do it for like the entire run of the show, but they take their time to have like 1 or 2 episodes specifically about Watson realizing that she might have PTSD. And I think that's great. There's like an entire there's an episode that ends with Watson having a war flashback where she experiences hallucinations, and then she goes and talks to her therapist, and there's an entire episode where she talks to her therapist and it said, you know, I think you have PTSD. And she, throughout that episode, like it's 1.5 episodes where she learns how to deal with that, to acknowledge the fact that this is something she deals with. And this is a bit of a spoiler, but it's actually quite a nice scene. There's this beautiful scene when she talks to her therapist and she shows her a scar on her back from an explosion during battle, and you feel how, you know, bad she feels about how she's kind of ashamed of that, how that happened, and she's still sort of traumatized from that event, and the therapist just sort of comes in and says, it's okay if you feel that way, you're allowed to feel that way. You're still you, you're still Watson, you're still that person, even though all those bad things happened to you. And that was such a wonderful moment for this character, because I think it often gets overlooked that Watson must have gone through so much terrifying and traumatizing events before they met Sherlock. Like I said, like Watson was at war, like in Afghanistan, or in this case in Syria, war medic, you know what kinds of things Watson has seen. So I'm not surprised that in this show they do acknowledge the fact that no, there might be something wrong with her. Like I said, it's not throughout the entire show. I would love it if we get an adaptation where they give Watson a whole character arc about him having PTSD or something like that. But I do appreciate that this show does actually sort of acknowledge that and takes its time to at least have like 1 or 2 episodes about that where she discovers that, no, I'm actually not healthy, I'm dealing with stuff. She also gets to have a bit of romance with one of the secondary characters who's also like a patient of the therapist, or who was also involved with like Syria and war. And they sort of bond over that, and I thought that was interesting. So, like I said, Watson's a bit passive, a bit shy, but there's a lot of cool and interesting background stuff going on with her that I like. And like I said, the relationship between her and Sherlock is still very much sort of at the core, as in that it's something that develops. It's something that very, very slowly develops. And I think it works very well if, like me, you're kind of into this idea that an adaptation explores how Watson and Sherlock came to be such great friends, and I think that the show manages to do that. Now, just to quickly talk about some of the other characters we get from the canon, like I said, we do get Lestrade, who has a different name, naturally, in this. I think he's very cute. I like the actor who plays him. I wish we would have gotten more involvement from the Lestrade character, because most of the time he's really just there hanging around at the crime scene, just being like, oh, Sherlock, great, you're here, you need some help. And that's sort of it. I wish he was a bit more involved in the actual investigations that are going on. They do kind of remedy that, though, with the final 2 or 3 episodes, where he he does a lot of cool stuff in the finale episodes. So I kind of appreciated that. But you know, sort of like a support character. I mean, not, if you think about it, not very much different than from the Lestrade in Sherlock. Very much just like a support character who's there for when, you know, crime scene and police stuff happens. That is there. We get Mycroft, and I think I actually kind of like how they do the relationship between Sherlock and Mycroft in this show. So Mycroft, who also has a different name, naturally, is still Sherlock's older brother. He still has a government position. I think he's like the secretary to the Prime Minister or something like that. Still like a very high government position. But he's not like in BBC Sherlock. He's not like this, I almost want to say god-like figure in the British government. He's not the Japanese government. You can tell he has a high position. He has a lot of status, but he's not ruling the country. He's not the Prime Minister of Japan or anything like that. But he has influence. but they do something else with him, as in he is, you know how in the books and also in the BBC show, Mycroft is very much characterized as being even smarter than Sherlock, but applying his intelligence in a different way, not like in the outside field, not in the practical field, but in politics, more like a theoretical thinker. They don't really do that. Mycroft is very much low-key in this show. He is more down to earth. He's basically the normal sibling. Like, Sherlock is the weird sibling, and Mycroft is the normal sibling. I don't know how I feel about like him not having the same sort of level of intelligence as Sherlock, because I kind of like that basically kind of says, you know, Sherlock is great, but you know, actually Mycroft is even better at the thing Sherlock does, but they don't do that, which you know. But I actually kind of like how the relationship between the two siblings works, because in the BBC show, the relationship between the two siblings is always very antagonistic and sort of cynical and cold, where they don't want to acknowledge that they like each other, which I always thought was weird. Because in the canon, I mean, they're not like, oh, hugs and kisses and, oh, I love your brother. Then, I mean, they're not like that, but like, they don't hate each other. Because in the BBC show, you get the feeling they hate each other. They don't like each other. I mean, it's not like that. They very much appreciate one another, and they acknowledge, like, even Sherlock himself acknowledges in the canon that Mycroft is smarter than him, probably, but just does other stuff. And in Miss Sherlock, it just feels like a normal sibling relationship. And I like that. Like, they tease each other. Mycroft is very much the older brother, whereas he, like, you know, he calls Sherlock out sometimes in some of her stuff. He's actually the one who comes up with the idea that Watson and Sherlock should move in together, because he's like, you know, my sister could do with some help, she could do with some friends. Why don't the two of you move in together? And, you know, he's kind of like, he's a bit protective of his sister in this, and I like that. And when the two meet, there's no antagonism, and I think that works so much better. You do get the feeling that this is an awkward relationship, mostly because Sherlock herself in this is so weird. But they do help each other out. They acknowledge each other's skills and how helpful they are. Sherlock is not being too much of an asshole towards his brother, and Mycroft is very much supportive of what Sherlock does and tries to help her at all times. And I just like that. There is, without spoiling it too much, there is a really cool badass scene in one of the later episodes where Sherlock does something, or is forced to do something, and Mycroft didn't want her to do it. And the person who was responsible for that happening just get absolutely decked in the face by Mycroft, because Mycroft is like, you made my sister do that. She didn't have to do it, and you made her do it, and just punches him in the face, and that felt so good. So good. So yeah, I'm not really too big of a fan of like the characterization itself that they do with Mycroft, but I do like the sibling relationship that they came up with. And there is also Moriarty in this show, and there is a bit of a reveal who Moriarty turns out to be, which is why I'm going to use they, them pronouns, because I don't want to spoil the surprise who it is. But the way they write Moriarty in this, Moriarty, they're different. They don't feel as outright menacing as they do, like, for example, like Andrew Scott does in BBC Sherlock. There's much more of a, there is this sort of calculating nature about it, but it's not like it doesn't feel like a constant threat. Like with this Moriarty, you don't feel like they are able to like kill you at any time, no matter where. It's much more like low-key and really about organizing stuff, and a lot more about you know, the psychological works of the character and how they apply those skills to the people around them. They do kind of run with, you know, there is a criminal organization but it's very much different from the one that we get in BBC Sherlock. When you then finally go on to meet Moriarty or find out who Moriarty is, which I think you can take a guess as to who of the characters in the show turns out to be Moriarty. I think you can take a good guess, but no, it was still a good reveal. And they were, like I said, when they were on screen, not as menacing, but I kind of like how they felt. You could very much feel like this academic side of Moriarty, because Moriarty is a professor. So you would think he has an academic side where he wants to where he wants to analyze stuff, and he wants to you know, he wants to be on top of things. He's observing things. That's very much who Moriarty is in the cat. He's just like a professor who's very intelligent and observant. And I kind of like how they run with that in Miss Sherlock. That when you see this Moriarty on screen, that they very much feel like someone who's just observing what's happening, that they have a plan, that they are scheming, they do have a plan. But it's not necessarily about the violence or creating chaos in the world or anything like that. It really just feels like this Moriarty is someone who they sit there and have this menacing, evil plan, and they want to toy with people just to sort of see what happens, because they want to prove something, because they have an idea of what would happen. And I kind of like that. Like, it doesn't have the menacing presence that you would expect from Moriarty, but in a way, I kind of appreciate that they do try to do something a bit differently with this Moriarty. And I'm going to talk a bit more about this in the spoiler bit during what happens in the finale. But it's not the best Moriarty characterization, but I feel it's a bit different. You can still feel like this is definitely the antagonist of the story, and that they are a great threat to Sherlock and Watson. And you really gain an understanding of why, in this particular adaptation, why Sherlock and Moriarty hate each other so much. Why Sherlock wants to defeat Moriarty. You really get a good reason and a great understanding of why these two are such great enemies. Again, it's similar with Watson. It is different. It's a bit more low-key. It's a bit quieter. But if you're open to, I think it still works. So in regards to what happens in the show, in the story, there isn't an overarching story. Not really. Like, you do have this criminal organization that sort of gets mentioned here and there throughout the episodes, but in and of itself, the show is very episodic, as honestly a TV adaptation of Sherlock probably should be. Like, you have cases in every single episode, and maybe occasionally the cases do tie into the greater, you know, criminal organization bit that has to do with Moriarty at the end. Naturally, that's not really a big surprise. But the cases, I think, work well. They don't really take that big of an inspiration from the canon. They even move away from like the BBC Sherlock stories. I think they do come up with some very interesting stuff. I think it works very well. Some of the solutions to the cases are very interesting. Sometimes they take you a bit by surprise. Some of them are a bit more interesting than others. You do occasionally get like little hints and references to maybe some of the stories. They're not as like big of a thing as maybe some other adaptations, but occasionally you maybe get like a little hint here or there for the ones who recognize that kind of stuff, which is cute. But overall, I think it works. You know, it's just Sherlock and John, or Sherlock and Dr. Watto, in this case, solving cases, you know, as it should be. And they're just doing their thing, and Sherlock's doing her deductions, everything. They do also have like this sort of visualization, as they do in the BBC show, with, you know, some of the text and images appearing on screen. But I have to admit, in Miss Sherlock, it kind of looks better in some instances. You know, when Sherlock just sort of does her deductions at times, and you see sort of the visualizations run over the screen. I don't know, for some reason, it sometimes looks oddly more pleasing than it does in the BBC show. But Miss Sherlock doesn't rely on it as much as the BBC show does, I would argue. You could say it's maybe a bit inconsistent, but when it appears, I think it's a nice little visual when it happens. So the case is interesting, like I said, episodic, and it all sort of ties together in the final 2, you could argue 3 episodes maybe. And I want to talk a bit, just for a minute, about the final 2 episodes. So in case you don't want any spoilers for the finale of the show, here's a spoiler warning as I jump into the final 2 episodes. I want to talk about the final 2 episodes of the show because those 2 episodes were my favorite episodes of the show, and they were fantastic storytelling. I thought they kind of felt very much like the Reichenbach Fall episode of BBC Sherlock. But then it sort of runs a different way. There are similarities, like we do get Sherlock and Moriarty face off at the like on the roof of a tall building. We get that kind of thing. We get like sort of some in-jokes with where the name Reichenbach comes from, and then in this story, we have Sherlock getting framed for crimes that, I mean, she obviously didn't commit. But, you know, it runs with this similar idea of Sherlock being accused. And in a way, I love the Reichenbach episode in BBC Sherlock, but what I like in this, in the way Miss Sherlock does it, is you feel like Sherlock could maybe actually be the culprit. I mean, naturally she isn't, but I feel like the framing of her character works much better in Miss Sherlock than it does in BBC Sherlock. Which is also helped by the fact that Watson believes it. Like, Watson gets broken, like psychologically broken by Moriarty. Like, Moriarty, they take in Watson, they sort of drive Watson away from Sherlock, and they take Watson with them and really much try to groom her to go against Sherlock. And I think that's so effective. Which is also why I think it works that Sherlock and Watson aren't like fully best friends yet in this adaptation. So it works that Watson would be like, how could Sherlock do this? And I don't understand what's going on. Then Moriarty sort of just latches onto that and takes that down, and they hammer it into Watson's brain. And I think that works really, really well. And there's also this moment of vulnerability from Sherlock. At the end of that one episode where she is forced to kill someone, and who she ends up shooting is Watson's boyfriend. She doesn't want to do it, but she has to. And Watson is just broken. She sees that happen, she cries, she screams. Sherlock has to run because otherwise the police would get to her because she's already been framed for other crimes. And then we just see her as she's on her own on the street. We see her break down because she's seen how broken Watson is. She didn't want to do this to her. She didn't want to do any of this. She didn't want to be forced to kill a man. She didn't want to hurt her one and only friend, who she now realizes she's probably lost through that deed. But it's happened, and she just cries and calls out for Watson. And I love that moment so much. And this is what carries over into the final episode. Well, it's just Sherlock trying to beat Moriarty and at the same time trying to get Watson back. And I love how it's really like sort of more of it's a battle of wits naturally, but it's also very much like a sort of a psychological battle, since Watson is taken in by Moriarty, and Moriarty, they are doing everything they can to play up this antagonism that Sherlock's been exuding throughout the show. And it works really well and sort of ends up in like a sort of Mexican standoff kind of thing on the roof, and Lestrade is helping out, and Mycroft is helping out. Like, everyone is helping out too, because they believe that Sherlock can't be that bad of a person, even if she did maybe commit some crimes, we don't know. But I think it's just cool how all of the characters come together to help Sherlock, and how Moriarty's just sort of there in the shadows, and they are doing their thing and manipulating everyone. It's very much about like sort of the emotional and psychological manipulations, much more so than it's about, you know, scheming the crimes and everything, which is what I find so interesting. And the final 2 episodes really tell an interesting thriller story, I would argue, about emotional pain, psychological pain, and just like a good crime story. And naturally, it does end the way every Reich Buffalo story ends, but I think it still works. And I like how they were not afraid to actually have Watson doubt Sherlock, to actually be like, oh no, I think Sherlock went bad. I think my friend became evil, and now I have to fight against her. I like how they don't shy away from that. So yeah, definitely the final 2 episodes are, I think, some of the like the best out of the 8. I would say none of the episodes are bad per se, but the last 2 episodes are definitely the strongest. Okay, to wrap up this review, this, I think, is a very interesting adaptation. If you're a huge fan of the BBC show like I am, I think you're definitely gonna enjoy this. Like I said, the characterization, the stylization, the visualization is very much similar to it, but it's still its own thing. For my taste, it takes maybe a bit too much inspiration from the BBC show, but, you know, it still kind of runs with it. And I think, you know, just through the Japanese localization, I think, and through the different actresses and different atmosphere, I think it still works as its own thing. And the actresses, especially the 2 main actresses, I think are doing a fantastic job. I like that we get like sort of just like episodic storytelling, because I think this is when Sherlock and Watson stories are at their best. It's just Sherlock and Watson solving cases, being cool, and doing stuff, because that's what Watson and Holmes stories are about, just them solving cases, doing cool and weird shit. That's what you want. And it does some neat little interesting things. I think you can very much get your teeth into this. It's a very good binge watch. I basically watched most of the shows like over last weekend. It's very good. I mean, it's like 8 episodes. I think one episode is like 45-50 minutes long. So it's very bingeable. Like I said, interesting characterization, different, maybe also relies a bit too much on previous adaptations, but I think it's still definitely a solid adaptation. I would definitely rewatch at some point. I think you can have a lot of fun with it. Maybe take it with the thought of it's based on the characters of the canon. It's like, yeah, based on them, but not like strongly. It's inspired by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, but based on BBC Sherlock. Maybe take it like that, and then you have maybe a bit more fun with it. But I think it's still different enough to be its own thing. I would personally argue. So I had a lot of fun with it. I would definitely give a recommendation to Miss Sherlock if you haven't watched it yet. If you have watched the show, please do tell me down in the comments below what your thoughts are on the show. I would love to hear some more opinions on it, since I haven't really seen anyone else on the internet talk about this Sherlock Holmes adaptation. Even though I would think that people would really like this, especially if they like BBC Sherlock so much, they would definitely like this as well. As always, if you have any kinds of other recommendations for future Baker Street reviews, books, TV shows, movies, video games, whatever, put them down in the comments below. I would always love to hear from you. Don't forget to like and subscribe if you haven't done already, and I'll see all of you very soon.